Should be live now.
Okay, I'd like to call this meeting to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please call roll.
Mr. Christian?
Here?
Mr. McGregor?
Here.
Mr. Modrick?
Here.
Mr. Nagel?
Here.
Mrs. Rule? Mr. Scalzo?
Here.
Mr. Spicuzza? Present. Mrs. Turner?
Here.
Mrs. Dobos?
Here.
8 members present.
I'd like a motion to adopt the agenda for business items.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Christensen, seconded by Ms. Turner. Please open the voting.
1 second. Having problems navigating here.
I'll just take a voice vote, Mr. McCausland. All in favor?
That's
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Carries unanimously, Mr. McCausland.
Thank you.
At this time, we have public comments on agenda items only. If anyone has would like to make any comments, the number's 412-851-6911. Only comments on the facilities and service agenda that has been posted in board docs online. We'll wait because of the delay for comments. Mr. Ginsani, I was assuming there weren't any comments, or you don't know. Dr. Ginsani, do you know if there are any comments? Okay. Oh, that's it.
From Mars, PA?
Might be where their
Call right. Phone
number
service.
originates.
Oh, yeah. 763 Milford Drive.
You can hit talk, I guess.
Good evening. Please state your name and address, and you will have 2 minutes to make your comments.
Hi, Ben Grisbeck, 2763 Milford Drive. Just calling in relation to the moving of 6th grade students to IMS. Specifically, I know a lot of people had questions about 6th graders being on the bus with high schoolers, so I was hoping that you would address that in your presentation. That's it. Thanks.
Any other calls? Seeing no more calls. Mr. Spicuzza,
We have no more calls.
would you like to start the committee meeting for facilities and services?
I certainly would. Do you want me to go through the awarding of the bid also?
Do each item separately because there's a presentation about the awarding of bids, I believe.
Yep, I'm aware of that. So the first item under Facility and Services Committee this evening is the awarding of bids for the high school. The Board of Directors approves the administration recommendation to award the following bids. High school courtyard backfill and drain repairs is awarded to J. Stewart Excavating, the amount of $92,499. The high school Foundation repair and waterproofing is awarded to Tom Brown Contracting in the amount of $19,850. And the third item is the high school arts classroom floor installation is awarded to JBL Construction in the amount of $19,250.
Okay, I need a second.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Scalzo. And so I think we need a report.
Good evening, everybody. You have some information in front of you. We're not going to go over it line by line, but I can give you a summary. If you recall, there
Can you
were...
put the microphone closer to your mouth?
Certainly.
That's
Is that
better,
helping?
yes.
Okay, thank you. At the high school, there were two areas where water was infiltrating the building. One was at a exterior wall adjacent to the courtyard. The other was in two classrooms of the lower level of the classroom wing. These were investigated. The causes were found for the water infiltration at the exterior wall adjacent to the courtyard. It was the failure of a cold joint. A cold joint is a joint that is put between two concrete pours. This happened at a very complex pour of the high school. There could have been some differential settlement that could have contributed to this. Differential settlement occurs when a new building it literally settles in to its site. It doesn't appear as if there's any ongoing settlement issues or any future settlement issues to be anticipated. So the solution is to clean out the cold joint that exists, that failed, and replace it. And then in order to do that, the existing sheet membrane waterproofing over all of the foundation needed to be removed. That will also be replaced. Then the backfilling will occur to cover it up again. So that's the courtyard issue. At the classrooms...
Can we ask questions as we're going
Oh, certainly,
along?
certainly.
So the building's 10 years old. Is there any liability regarding something that was done improperly, or is it just about the settling, or
Yeah,
can you tell me?
right. It does appear like it was built according to specifications, and the specifications were kind of a belt and suspenders. There was a cold joint waterproofing put in, and then the sheet membrane put on top of that, but that did fail. Again, there are many, many joints. This is the only one where failures occurred. You have a 1-year warranty for labor and parts, essentially, and materials. So no, 10 years later, there really isn't any liability to pursue.
Thank you.
Certainly. And then the other location was at two art classrooms. So there was vinyl tile. The vinyl tile was rippling and coming up off the concrete. After we investigated it and also went back and looked at the original contract documents and specifications, as well as meeting minutes, here's the upshot. At the time the concrete floors were poured in the lower levels of both the athletic wing and the classroom wing, there was high moisture content in the concrete at that time. The solution at that time was one of two things: wait, a period of 4 to 6 months for that moisture to essentially come out of the concrete as the concrete cured over long term, or apply a water mitigation compound to the concrete. The board at that time did not want to wait 6 months because obviously that would have backed up the opening of the new high school. They also looked at the price of the water mitigation, which was $2 million. The board then asked the architect, us and Weber Murphy Fox, along with the construction manager, what would happen? And we said, well, if you don't put it on, there could be some floors that come up over time, because of the moisture content. That appears to be the case in this particular classroom. Also, it's compounded by the fact that there's heavy pieces of equipment. These two art room classes have pottery wheels in them that's dragged across the floor. So at the time, the board said, we'd rather save $2 million. If there's a couple rooms that have to be replaced over a period of time, we'll do that and absorb the cost at that time. So that's where we are at today. Again, right now, there isn't a water moisture issue at all after 10 years. But it appears the adhesive at the time, and again, just in a small amount of detail, if you recall, about 10 years ago, VOCs, which is the, volatile organic compounds, were being outlawed from adhesives. And so water-based adhesives were being developed, and they were new at the time, but that's what had to be used because you weren't allowed to use VOCs. Those early water-based adhesives did not counter high moisture content as well as, water-based adhesives do today. So our recommendation for the floor, because of the use of that room and over time, seeing that the pottery wheels are dragged around the room, we're recommending that an epoxy coating be put on, that the existing flooring be removed and an epoxy coating be put down.
Can I ask you a question on the
Yes.
epoxy coating?
I can't even hear you. Is your microphone on?
Yeah, my microphone's on. Can you hear me now? Okay, we're going to eat these tonight. The question is, with the pottery wheels and whatever else we're putting in the other art room being pulled around, could we scratch the epoxy? And what is the process to fix that so that the moisture doesn't come up through? How likely is that to happen? And if moisture is coming up through and somebody does not discover initially that the epoxy was scraped, whatever you want to, or you can't see it because it's that thin, will it bubble, and what are our options then?
I think I'll take them in the order. I think I heard you. One is, can the epoxy scratch? Yes, anything can scratch, but the epoxy is very scratch resistant. So, we feel it's going to be better than putting any other, another vinyl product down on the floor. Secondly, the epoxy itself does mitigate water transmission. So it actually is a way of treating, moisture in the floors. But again, right now, we did have the floors tested. They're only about 70%, which is actually a fairly low amount of moisture in concrete. So we really don't think that's going to be a problem going forward. But if there is any issue, the epoxy will seal that floor.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Hayes, I have a few questions for you. First of all, with the courtyard, the cold joint water seepage, you stated that everything was built according to specifications. Who wrote those specifications?
We did.
Okay. Was there any cost-saving measures asked to be put into the specifications when building the high school in this regard?
No.
No?
No, I mean, it was a belt and suspenders type. I mean, you put the cold joint on. It's standard practice. You put a cold joint over a concrete joint, and then you put we used a bentonite clay sheet membrane. That's standard practice.
Okay. And as far as the epoxy, you stated that the board at the time asked that you don't deal with the water remediation, we just deal with the problems as they come going forward.
Correct.
Okay.
That was the option the board at that time chose.
So as we're looking at this epoxy remedy now, while we're forward, how long can we expect something like that to last? Is it something we're going to have to revisit periodically, seal periodically, or is it a permanent fix?
Sure. Again, as long as the epoxy isn't damaged, and again, it can be, it is a finish, it should last 15 or 20 years.
Okay.
You said that some of this moisture was in two places, the art room and the gymnasium, or when the original time, when it was...
The lower levels in the whole building, so the athletic wing and the classrooms.
There are no problems in the athletic wing, as far as we know?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, you did have some moisture in under the terrazzo that was remediated a number of years ago.
Okay.
Mr. Hayes, can I go back to the first option? As we go back for the excavation of the courtyard, sorry. As we go back into putting all of this fill back in, and we've mitigated it, we're putting the membranes down, we're putting the, lack of a better word, the piping to pipe the water away. What are the chances of that getting soot, soil, whatever else in them again, and having this problem? What are the recommendations to making sure this is kept correctly so we're not digging up this courtyard? And
right,
the disruptions to student life, those kinds of things going on.
Sure. Yeah, so again, in terms of what's being done, in terms of when the soil's been put back, is there is going to be filter fabric put around the drain that's there. Again, it was hard to know through the excavation. It was difficult to see exactly what happened at the location where the leak was occurring. We think that there could have been a foundation drain blockage at that point. As we say in the report, we did have a pipe cleaning company come out, and they video scoped the entire length of the courtyard foundation drain. There were several blockages, and they cleared those out. So when we're putting the dirt back in, there's filter fabric being put back on, and then there is 24 inches of gravel between the building and the soil as it goes up, and that will be replaced. Again, that will also help the water fall to the foundation drain.
Okay, Mr. McCausland, I have a question for you. We have the money to do this?
Yeah, this come out of our, this will actually get charged to the ARP ESSER since it's a moisture issue and an environmental issue. So we were planning to use some of the ARP ESSER money that we're getting to handle the costs of these projects.
The other thing I'll note for everybody here tonight is we will have a full report to give to the board on this, photographs, more data, more information of the whole of the issues that will be at the agenda meeting in October. Again, just it's a little bit cart before the horse, only because timing-wise, we wanted to get this bid and awarded so that it could be filled in before winter.
Okay, I have an additional question. Once we put all the rock down and we have the fabric over it, we put the rock down, we start with the soil, are we going to send another camera down there to make sure that there's no issues before we start filling this all in?
Well, right now, there is no, again, we can do whatever the board would like. But yes, if you'd like to do that, we can do that.
I'm just concerned that we get it all done and we have...
A blockage, you can. Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, yeah, go ahead.
You know, we watched the sun pump put in. My kids were amazed at my parents' house how they did all this and put this in, especially my younger one. And then that's what they did. They made sure that the pipe all the way to the outside and where they were dumping it was clear. They put another camera down from there. So my concern is we do all this work and for some odd reason we have a collapse. We've filled this in and we're back to where we are and we're looking at $100,000+ to fix all of this.
Right. Sure.
So,
We can do that.
Dr. Walsh, is the work, particularly in the art classrooms, is that expected to cause educational disruption?
That's a good question. I asked Mr. Hayes to tell how long does that installation take? How
No.
many?
Yeah, the contractors that we approached, they're going to do it in 4 days over the holiday break.
Okay, any other questions or concerns? Okay, Mr. McCausland, please open the voting.
Voting's open. Mr. McGregor?
Yeah, it didn't pop up. It's a yay for me.
Yeah, motion carries.
Mrs. Dobis, beforehand, can I ask Mr. Spicuzzo when we put this back on the agenda for October to talk about adding, if there is a price or additional cost to put that camera back down there before we seal this whole thing up? Could we look into that also?
Certainly.
I think that work will be done by the next meeting. That's why we're approving it tonight, so we get done before the frost.
We just awarded the bid.
I understand that. I'm just saying, double checking that it is all done. So after it's all done, would be the October meeting to put a camera down.
Oh,
Sure.
I see. Okay.
Okay, Mr. Spicuzzo, you want to move on to number 2?
Yep. Yes, thank you, Mrs. Dobis. Item number 2 is a presentation on middle school model. Dr. Walsh and Mr. Minch are going to provide a timeline in schematic design with Dr. Jane Sandy.
Right, Thank you, Mr. Spicuzza. Good evening, everyone. So I'd like to narrow the focus this evening onto the broader context of which brings us in the room tonight, and to also stay focused on one particular piece of the district's facilities master plan with relation to IMS. But to do that, I think we should do a very quick recap of where we are, how we got to this point. So can you scroll up for me there? I'm going to ask Mr. Mensch is going to advance my slides for me. So I'm on slide number 2 for those working from home. So it was about a year ago that the board engaged the Hayes Design Group to conduct a feasibility study of our kindergarten through 8th grade facilities to analyze the needs, the facility opportunities, and address the enrollment and capacity of the buildings in a very comprehensive way, both educational and facility space and use of space, etc. There were 6 large general takeaways that came from the study, and 3 of them, relevant to tonight's discussion, speaks to the fact that buildings have space and some buildings have no space. There was a general inequity when it came to sizes and capacities and room usage, etc., through the kindergarten through 5th grade or 4th grade buildings, and the opposite in IMS, where there was excessive space. The other big takeaway from the feasibility study was that these buildings are aging. The mechanical systems are nearing their end of life, and other architectural issues could be addressed or need to be addressed in the buildings. This would be estimated somewhere between $70 and $100 million of renovation and alteration costs to address the concerns that were found in the feasibility study, and potentially at the same time take advantage of educational opportunities and maximize 21st century learning through those renovation projects. At the point of the work that the Hayes Group completed, they did some extensive discussions with different stakeholder groups, staff members, administrators, student groups, etc., to glean out what educational opportunities could be captured through this work or during this work in order to bring not just the facilities up to date, but to put them into the 21st century and beyond. And at the conclusion of the feasibility study are 11 options. These 11 options would address all of the issues and opportunities that the study had uncovered, and all of them coming at it from a different way. Moving students, closing buildings, building buildings, renovating buildings. All of the options were explored and expressed. Tonight, however, we're staying focused on just one piece of that finding, because in all of the relevant and realistic findings in the results, all of those point to the IMS undercapacity and the opportunity to return IMS to a true middle school with 6th through 8th grade. So my part of the presentation tonight will be about that focus, about that opportunity, and to remind the board a good bit about middle schools, the middle school philosophy, and the educational opportunities that could be maximized and captured through this project. I do want to pause and just say, importantly at this point, there's no vote tonight about going forward with this. This is information for the board in your considerations, because at some point in the near future you have to decide what options you want to take from that list of 11. It is not an option to do nothing. The age of the buildings, the infrastructure, the mechanical systems need to be addressed. The question that's in front of the board, the largest question of all, is what option should you pursue? But, again, all of those options would involve work at IMS and putting your 6th grade in the Independence Middle School to a true middle school. So let's talk about middle schools then and give that refresher to the board about the middle school philosophy. Mr. Mensch and I have put together some information that we'd like to share with the board and those watching tonight about this process, this project, and the opportunities that are there. Let me start with the foundations of middle schools. So, our 50s, 60s, there was some investigation opportunities that were occurring in the country with moving students into a 6th through 8th grade configuration. There was also a larger population of junior highs throughout the country. But in 1966, the superintendent at Upper St. Clair Schools, Don Eichhorn, wrote and published the first book, sort of the definitive seminal work on middle schools. And he based this work on Piaget's theories about development, child development, and in particular, adolescent development. And his simple premise was, there are ways you can design and operate a school to address the uniqueness of the adolescent and maximize that uniqueness in order to meet their needs. Hence, the middle school. Generally, your 6th through 8th graders are going through that phase of development. So Eichhorn's work, based on Piaget, talked about several pieces of a middle school that would be necessary to meet those expectations that Piaget put out. For instance, that the educational program would be based on active learning, where students are actively engaged in their learning. Group work or interaction with peers is also a hallmark of the middle school. So they get time, lots of time in social interactions with their peers. Reducing competition and competitive activity is a hallmark of a middle school. Since the students are going through various developmental stages and at different rates, students generally have different capabilities physically and cognitively, and so competition would be a detriment to their development. So you'd see phys ed programs would be more choice-based of activities and less competitive-based. Curriculum would be exploratory, where it would go more broad than deep. Adolescents are still trying to find their identity, their interests, and what drives them or what their passions are, and so exploring different things helps feed that developmental stage in their life. Flexible scheduling is another hallmark that Eichhorn included in his design. Because you have a concentrated group and teachers organized in certain groupings, that you can flexibly schedule bells to coincide with the kind of activity that's happening in the school. Another big hallmark of the middle school is grouping students into teams, breaking them down, the whole population, into smaller teams, and they spend their academic time on that team and with their peers and the teachers of that team. Again, building strong relationships done more in a safer, smaller group. Interdisciplinary instruction, where we break silos of curriculum, science and math and social studies and English all working together on themes and topics. And then, again, your unified arts, your industrial arts, all the other practical art programs are done in an exploratory way, say 9 weeks at a time, exploring the skills and the concepts that are to be learned. So again, students get more exposure to things rather than going deeply with them. So that's the 60s, and the programs continued to flourish until the National Middle School Association codified the middle school model with 14 look-fors, 14 key parts. And I've listed them here. I'll review them briefly for the board. Again, and you'll hear a lot of Eichhorn's work as well as Piaget's work in these 14 points of a middle school. Number one, of course, above all else, is that we recognize the developmental uniqueness of the adolescent in middle school. And that's different, and their needs are different. And so organizing and structuring the middle school with kids going through that phase would address those needs uniquely. The leaders in the school, not just the administrators, but the teacher leaders in the school, are keenly aware of those developmental needs and also know how to apply the educational theories for them and for students to succeed in those situations. And at the same time, developing a unique culture in which the students can thrive. There's a point shortly here about that culture. A shared vision or an understanding of the mission of middle schools, and if I sum it up or succinctly say, it's caring about the students' academic development as much as you do about their social emotional development. So it's an equal, balanced approach to student development. So that culture I mentioned a moment ago comes from the development of the administration and the teachers together, who make the building an inviting place for kids to be and supportive of them during this rough time of development, and safe, really physically and cognitively safe for kids to explore, to investigate and discover themselves and their place in the world through education. Another key hallmark of middle schools is that the educators in the system want to nurture the potential of every child, knowing that they're all coming in at different phases of development and will finish and leave at different stages of that development. So we believe in their potential to make it through, and to each giving to each what they need to advance or to grow. Continuing with those middle school points, active learning again, we heard that from the ICORN work. The adults in the building, not just the administrator or the teacher leaders, but the adults are the advocate for the middle level learner. They're advisors to them about the challenges they face in life, and mentors about their options in the future and how to make good choices. Adolescence is also the time historically where kids began to test boundaries with parents and the family structure. And so the middle schools have to involve parents in a unique way, because those kids are starting to develop their own independence, but yet they also still need parental and adult support to guide them and make good choices. So a good middle school has parental involvement in the right kinds of ways. I mentioned this already with the ICORN work about curriculum. It's interdisciplinary and it's exploratory. More opportunity to go wide than you go deep. Teaming and group work is another hallmark that we come up in these 14 points, and making sure that the students' learning experiences are engaging and interactive with their partners and with groups so that they have that social experience. We'll scroll up. Assessment and evaluation shouldn't just be a one snapshot. It should be more like a photo album looking for growth over time as kids move through their development. Interdisciplinary teams, where the school enrollment is divided up into smaller groups, and those kids spend their academic time together in that small group. A team approach, same teachers, same peers, same classroom pods, so that we've kind of shrink their world to a safer, more familiar, recognizable size and space. Again, back to that culture point, the culture of the school is physically and psychologically safe, where kids can be themselves and try and discover who they are, what they're good at, what they're not good at, develop friendships, and work through those experiences of developing friendships and how to do that. Middle schools are responsive to the needs of the adolescent learner. So those 14 points then have really been the hallmark or the foundation of middle schools for the past 25 years. And in 1989, that analysis was done by the Carnegie Council on Adolescent Development, where they studied the needs of the adolescent learner based on all the developmental theories that we're aware of, and found that those 14 points are absolutely, confidently what is necessary for them, for success for them educationally in life. There were a few other studies that have been done to validate and support the advantages of middle schools. For instance, there was a large comprehensive study that compared the achievement of students in middle schools versus junior highs. and found that generally speaking, when the programs of a middle school model, those 14 points are in place, there's higher achievement for middle school kids. Another point done back in 2006, a study by Erb found that middle schools in general boost student performance because they address the social, emotional, and academic needs of children at that stage. And the final point on the slide addresses a large study in 2000 that found that middle schools in general achieve great things, but when middle schools follow all of those points, all 14 of those points, and teachers are using 21st century learning skills like problem solving and critical thinking, then that's when you have your most or your highest achievement gains in middle schools. I'm going to turn it over now to Mr. Mensch, who's going to take us a deep dive into the pieces of a little bit more about learning theory and also about how the move of sixth grade to IMS would maintain or enhance the programming that they have in the middle school model. Mr. Mensch.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Walsh. Good evening, everyone. So yes, I'm here to speak as the outgoing middle school principal of Independence, where we spent 16 years of myself with these students. The biggest thing that Dr. Walsh has talked about really comes down to their brain development, their physical development. Their brain is developing at a faster rate than they've seen since infancy. And the parts of their brain that haven't fully developed or haven't caught up to the parts of their brain that have, most notably their emotional part of their brain has developed drastically, whereas their rational part of their brain has not. And if you've ever had a middle schooler, you know they make comments such as, everybody's saying it, everybody's talking about me, because their emotions are very heightened about their insecurities, about what's going on around them. But at the same time, they can't really stop themselves to think long enough about why what they're saying is really absolutely not true. And that's because of the way that their brain is developing. There's a big need for middle schoolers to focus on their organizational skills. They have a lot of executive functioning weaknesses, so things that you do in the classroom would be catered towards organizational skills or metacognitive skills, which are teaching them how they think, how they problem solve, how they attack problems. If you've ever heard your child at home complaining about homework because they don't know where to start, right? They're overwhelmed about where to start. That's a very middle school statement to make. Much of our time in the middle school, whether it's a teacher or an administrator, I can tell you I spend 90% of my day dealing with the emotional and rational brain and the inequity between the two. And middle school teachers, by nature, have to do a lot of concrete examples. They might say something like, "Why does Mr. Smith only pick on me? He only thinks I'm the one that's talking in the classroom." And so you have to rationalize with them about why they've filled the cup of Mr. Smith a lot more times than Joey down the table, who's only talked once, but you've been talking 8 times in the classroom, right? So you have to make these connections for them so that they understand. And that's what middle school teachers do, and that's what the middle school theory is about, is supporting that aspect of their development. From the academic considerations, we very much are advocates of the teaming philosophy. Dr. Walsh talked all about the teaming philosophy in the ICORN literature and research. The bottom line is that those 5 teachers, those teachers that are around in that pod area, they're spending their whole day communicating with those same 120 students. And so the relationships that they're building with those students can be transferred to other teachers who are maybe having more difficulty with that student. And that conversation in a team situation happens very naturally. Whereas in a junior high model, you don't have those natural connections with the teacher that's right next door to you. The other piece that the teaming helps with is the cross-curricular connections that can be made. It's very difficult for teachers that aren't even in the same wing of a building to make cross-curricular connections, whereas middle school teachers are right next to each other and they have team planning time. Team planning time is an essential component of a middle school. So we definitely are very much advocates for teaming in a 6 through 8 model. Something that we all know is that the 6th grade started at Independence. So that middle school piece went really with them to Neil Armstrong for the most part. And really that would be bringing it back to the home base of where it started, which was a 6th through 8 middle school. That's where it started. And that's why they operate in 2 different capacities at that school. So, one of the things that I really like is, we're going to be able to, in this situation, if we were to move in this direction, is to have really a nice cohesive music program. We all know we love our music programs here. Right now we share teachers across buildings. We'd be able to have continuity with our music teachers in the chorus, orchestra, and band programs. I think that's really a positive because we do love our music programs. The related arts offerings, I think we could potentially look at some inclusion of family consumer science, which students do not have at Neil Armstrong at this time. Of course, we'd have to make some curricular decisions about that. But all other aspects of their unified arts, that exploratory moment that Dr. Walsh was talking about, they would have, and maybe more opportunities again with the family consumer science. One thing that we've seen a lot of here in recent history is the busing of students from Neil Armstrong to IMS, because there's a growing number of students that we are pushing forward in math, sequence, pacing, and acceleration piece for them that's bringing them over to Neil Armstrong, or over to IMS from Neil Armstrong, and obviously we would be avoiding that. So that would be an enhancement, I think, to what is going on now. Also, you'll notice in the strategic planning, there was a lot of discussion about math remediation at the 5-6 building that is not currently there, that we do have at IMS that we would be able to implement for our students that would be coming over with the 6th grade if they did in fact come. We also have a very robust reading remediation program that has a 2-pronged approach, a structured literacy approach and a comprehension-based approach. We would be able to really, I think, make solid use of that program. And also, you also know that we won a grant a few years back where we started investing in our STEAM spaces, and with a possible renovation with Mrs. Figlioli on board, we could heighten that within a renovation project, I think. As I mentioned, we would be able to have a lot of continuity in that music program. Something else that we do at Independence that we'd be able to offer our students is Exploratory Days, where we do that once or twice a year, depending on the schedule, where our teachers do introductory types of activities. We do fly fishing, we do extreme paper airplanes, and aerodynamics and things like that. They have a good time with the Exploratory Days. The big thing that you saw in brain development is empathy. They lack empathy. They're very self-centered, so we focus a lot on service learning projects at our school. It is a huge emphasis. Every team has a service learning project. Obviously, we'd like to bring that to all the kids 6 through 8 if they were to come. The advisory time, we'd like to see a reinvestment in that, frankly. I'd like to see that if we did bring 6th grade over, a reinvestment into the advisory time. Right now, we have a hybrid of that where we have teachers that do specialized things during homerooms that kids go and do. But advisory is much more about building that relationship during that 15-minute homeroom time. So I would like to see that grow. But right now we have mentoring programs with the SOAR program, which is a mentoring program for our special needs students. I'm very excited about our NJHS program that's going to be providing mentoring to our HOT program. We'd be able to outlay that to the 6th grade where they'd be able to be mentors for our special needs or get mentorship from some of our NJHS students for HOT or for morning homeroom for math tutoring. The other thing that we offer at Independence Middle School that would heighten that program, I think, for them is the academic assistance program that's on team. We schedule students based on need. It's basically a pre-referral strategy to special education, okay? So it mirrors very much what a resource situation would look like. We'd be able to offer that. And of course, we have a strong mental health component. We had student assistance, and we were one of the first sites to have site-based therapy. So we do have that, and a strong social work component with Mrs. Gilliam, who's a fabulous social worker for us, and then a comprehensive guidance counseling system with our 2 counselors, Mr. Lorenzi and Mrs. Blodgett. From the facility standpoint, I think what we started out with is exactly what we're saying, is that the 6th grade was there. The facility is there to have teams, to operate in teams. Bringing back that 6th grade would not, need, a really reconfiguration of the entire building or anything. We would need to be rehabbing the building due to the aging facility, but the actual makeup of the building is quite conducive to this. As far as the renovations, we talked about the STEAM programming. But what's really nice, I think, about the way that we could stage this in if we decided to go this route would be to isolate the sixth grade within that first floor corridor down to the bottom right. So the facility has the ability for us to really create a learning pod of its own with the sixth grade. So I do think that's an advantage of the building, where in that case, kids 6 periods out of 9 would really only be traveling maybe 25 yards to their classes. So they have some independence, but they're not just really out and about like we see at the high school where kids are, all over the place and having to manage their time much more effectively. Lastly, the renovations, if we did go through with those would really help an aging building. My head custodian, Bill Raniger, he's one of the best you will ever find, and he has done a tremendous job. But the advantage, if we did do this, is that we'd be able to bring a real nice, fresh renovation to a building that frankly needs some TLC. It needs some TLC, despite the efforts of a really great man in Bill Raniger. So I appreciate the time to talk to you about that this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Mensch. And so again, to put it back in context, that this was one piece of the larger feasibility study. It was a key piece, as I mentioned, that any of the options that the board may choose down the road would require this type of move to maximize the space and maximize the educational opportunity. Wanted to give you this deep dive into the middle school model and the advantages of the move because of the fact that it is integral to all of the options that the board is facing. However, there's no decisions to be made tonight about that. This is just your first big deep step into what's coming down the road of a larger choice about the facilities and how we have to address renovation needs that are pressing. There's the one important point, I guess, that's worth saying is we can't do nothing. Okay, so that's all I had for you, Mrs. Dobbs.
So.
Questions?
I do have a question, but I don't know whether it will. It's a question for Mr. Hayes or for you all, and that is, in the design, it looks like we're planning for 3 teams of 6th grade, and that's what we have right now?
We actually have 2 teams operating right now.
Okay.
I think we're, again, very early in this investigative phase. I mean, there's a lot of conversations that need to be had with a lot of groups, but the way that it would be configured would be up to 3 teams.
Okay, that's what I saw. And then as part of that teaming, there's a particular room in there that's a science room for the science teacher. Mm-hmm. So then there would be, the teams would be science, math, social studies, English, and readings as needed, or reading to? Well,
reading's a part of the curricular program up through 7th grade, even though we do offer a semester in 8th grade. But it would be a part of the offering, yes, reading.
Okay, so it would be 4 to 5 teachers on a team, depending on the reading component.
Well, and social studies would do.
And social studies.
Yes.
Correct.
Did I missed it one?
Well, you mentioned it, but currently 6th grade doesn't have a dedicated social studies teacher.
Oh, okay. That's right. That was part of the.
Right. It's in the
Yes.
strategic plan as a target for the
Right.
board to look for is to expand 6th grade into a 5-team configuration. Again, we're kind of an open book here at this point in terms of 5 or 4. That's not something that necessarily has to be committed even at the renovation stage, because you can do that, 5 pod rooms and still have a social studies room, but not necessarily staffed that way.
Okay, because I was just wondering about the rooms, how many rooms there were allocated for each team and how many people were on a team. Not that all the teachers on a team are teaching at the exact same time. Anyway, I mean, there would be shared. I was just trying to.
Yeah, you're getting ahead of us on this one. We haven't gone that far.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
As I was looking at your plan, and I'm listening to you, I was trying to make it work in my head. So, okay, I'll be quiet.
So this was, I really like what you both had to say. A lot of great advantages of that model. Is there, just to be thorough, are there any disadvantages, okay? Or at some point we made a decision to move 6th grade to IMS, and does anybody recall what the reasons were for that? And did we, it must have been related to some advantages that we perceived. Did we ever realize those, or did we realize we were wrong?
Yeah, so I got some history from our resident historian here, Dr. O'Rourke, who
Okay.
was principal at NAMS, and I don't want to misquote, but I believe the explanation was there was a point at which where enrollment was large enough to have 2 middle schools, and so IMS and NAMS were middle schools.
Okay.
And then as the enrollment declined, the option was to split them into 2 separate graded middle schools, so a 5-6 and a 7-8. It was all enrollment based. It really
Okay.
wasn't programmatic based. I think Mr. Mensch made a brief reference to that earlier when he said most of what we're looking at does exist at NAMS, and maybe looks a little different or sounds a little different, but it's there. We want to bring it back home, I guess, is the phrase he used. So no, there wouldn't be something that we're trying to undo or
Right.
necessarily. However, there certainly could be disadvantages. And Mr. Grisback asked at the opening on his phone comment about busing, for instance. Again, that's a question that's probably 3 or 4 months down the road from now. Do we need to redo our bus runs and have the middle schools run
Right.
separately from the secondary high school building? That's a possibility.
Yeah.
It might be necessary, given the enrollments and the size and the amount of buses we'd need, to do a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 runs versus a 9, 12 run and a 6, 8 run.
Yeah, I think that's, those are issues, at this point, minor issues that you have to take in as design requirements into the solution. But at this point, they shouldn't be reasons not to move forward. Okay, I mean, those are just things we have to figure out. But I like the advantages, and we've seen for years that, especially in the area of, say, math, okay, that we see a dip in 8th grade, but it's probably not because of just 8th grade. It's probably because of some of the things leading up to it. So, what's your view on, bringing students into the middle school a little bit earlier, getting them in that environment, and, I got to believe it's going to be a positive impact on some of the testing scores we see in 8th grade, but also the readiness to leave middle school and go to high school.
Yeah, and math's a particularly unique piece because it is really, in terms of developmental readiness, you have students in 8th grade who are already taking geometry, students, a bulk of students taking algebra, and students taking a general 8th grade math curriculum more aligned to 8th grade standards. So it's that range that I think is a great example of what we talked about in the developmental span of kids at this age, that some are zooming through the academic stuff because of their developmental phases and speed versus others not. They're all going to get through math. They're all going to get through algebra. It's just a question of when they're ready for it.
Yeah.
So to Mr. Mensch's point earlier that, right now we're busing them to keep up with the math needs. This would potentially, if the move were to be made, would avoid that. They're in the same building. Don't need to be bused to get the math that they need.
Right. Well, that may also eliminate any reservations that some students may have to accelerate their math placement. The whole idea of going to a different building may be a little bit scary.
I'll leave my timing questions and concerns aside because we're not discussing that tonight, when we're going to make these moves. I do want to kind of reiterate a couple things, maybe go over, clarify. So currently, the middle school model strategies that we've discussed are being implemented also in NAMS, correct?
Correct.
So a lot of the concerns that we have here that we want to address are being addressed currently in Neil Armstrong.
Yeah, I think it's important to say that they're not necessarily, there's not a whole lot that they're going to get that they're not already getting.
Right.
It's important to say they're not going to lose either.
Right.
So that's the just maybe a cup half full, cup half empty way of looking at it.
Right. So on the page that says, I don't have page numbers here, but evidence in support of middle schools is the heading. It says about higher achievement scores with the middle school model. That's in relation to what? What
Into two
model?
Yeah,
Or
two
are
other
they
configurations. There is, the city of Pittsburgh, for instance, went all in with K-8 buildings
Right.
several years ago, thinking that that would be the answer. And research is finding that it is, in fact, successful through 5th grade,
Right.
and then it starts to plateau.
Okay.
And the other would be a junior high, which would be that you wouldn't have any of the middle school model. It would be kids would have 7 periods a day and not a team structure or not learning pods. It's basically a junior high school with a more academic focus, not an adolescent focus.
Okay,
So that it would be in comparison to 2 other models.
okay.
Right.
And I'd like to corroborate what Dr. O'Rourke said, that a while ago, when the move was made, the intention was to create a minor middle school with 5th and 6th grade, but it never happened. 5th grade continued to operate as elementary, and 6th grade operated as middle for various reasons. So that's, for me, an important reason to move 6th grade back into the whole environment with the whole middle school concept and the whole building and all of that with it whenever it happens.
So another question I have, it says, accelerated math courses would be available to 6th grade without busing students. You've stated or inferred that we are currently busing students for the accelerated math. About how many students are we busing?
It varies year to year. I've seen, as little as just a couple to as
Okay.
many as dozen.
Okay.
But I think what you're going to see is some more of that as the years progress.
I don't want to sound like I'm like a detractor of this plan. I'm just trying to get clarification. There are several positives I see here also. The consolidation, the robust remediation programs for math and reading, the enhanced maker spaces that are more grade level appropriate, things like that. So I see a lot. I really appreciate your presentation, both of you. I just wanted to get some clarity on our middle school models with what we have versus what we're looking at. So.
Right. I should also include Mr. Patterson, who did contribute to our presentation as well, although he's not in the room, but he was also part of this discussions and analysis of what we're trying to accomplish here.
So can I, point of clarification, this would then stop the 2-bell system at Neal, correct? Because we would go back, moving 6th grade, so 6th grade would move in tandem with 7th and 8th grade on the bell schedule at IMS. So we wouldn't have the disruption to 5th grade learning either with the bell schedule that currently happens at 6th grade.
That's correct.
And then the other thing too is our 6th graders would have a shorter day because those that are bused to IMS do that math class first thing in the morning when I have talked to parents before. So those kids have an extra almost hour-long day than anybody else. So we're consolidating that option too. So we're not stretching their day, we're not stretching their attention span, all those kinds of things to move them into 6th grade for the math, and or we may see some reading acceleration with that also.
Yeah. Yes.
I have another question. I forget, are 6th grade students allowed to participate in the sports programs?
Typically, that is not the case. But we do have a pretty robust club sponsorship, and while they do have some of that at Neil Armstrong, we're, I think, a little more diverse in what we offer there.
Right.
So the last question I have maybe for Mr. Hayes, the $70 to $100 million renovation price tag over the next 5 years.
Well, that's part 3. He has to do his presentation.
I get you. I'm just asking. I just want to ask a question, point of clarification on this presentation. Does that include the renovations to IMS, or because that was going to happen either way?
That is correct.
Okay. That's
Okay,
all
I'm sorry. I thought you were Okay, so any other questions about the educational presentation, about the middle school model?
Just my clarification, so I'm hearing it. Our programming, I think you said, there's no decrease in programming. All this gives us the opportunity to offer our kids more opportunities within the building and to have more support systems be in place and more educational opportunities for the kid children by moving 6 up to IMS.
Right, that's what we hope you heard tonight.
That's okay. I want to make sure that's what we heard.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Modrak.
Thank you, Doc.
Okay, Mr. Spacuzza, moving on.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Dobis. Third item under Facility and Services this evening is the presentation from the Hayes Design Group. I would ask Mr. Hayes and his group to begin their presentation.
Yes, we're going to do that. I think we have a little bit of coordination of the technology, but everybody should have a booklet in front of them that has a schematic design review packet. It may be easier for all the board members to look at that versus the screen. You can do either one. They're also going to be up on the screen for anybody at home. All right. I'm going to turn it over to Mike Smith, a project architect in our office.
Okay, so if you guys could open up the packet to the first page. What the first page in here does, this is just a summary. Get it on the screen here. This is a summary of...
Can you move the microphone as close as you can to your mouth? Just pull it forward. Thank you.
There we go. Is that better? That sounds
Yes.
better. All right, so this first page is a summary of our efforts during the initial phase of this project in August and September to look at the building program for the proposed 3-grade Independence Middle School. So we looked at not just what we would want to plan from a 6th grade standpoint, but we also looked at really the whole building. What's the impact to 7th and 8th grade by moving 6th grade into here? And I'm not going to really read through this whole thing, but I'll just mention we had a number of meetings with the district administration, the NAMS principal, with Dave, with special education to go over not just the building program, but the plans that we're going to show you here in a little bit. And some of the key points here, the bullet points, I'll hit some of these that came out of our programming discussions. We talked about this a little bit so far today, that it was decided that the best arrangement of classrooms would be a 4-team teaching pod. So we have 3 of those that you'll see in the plan. 6th grade would be isolated on the first floor. 7th and 8th grade would be all upstairs. We talked about moving the special education rooms, the autistic support, the life skills rooms, move those from the 2nd floor down to the 1st floor in order to move the world language rooms upstairs. Since world language is 7th and 8th grade based, get those rooms upstairs, keep 7th and 8th grade rooms all together upstairs, and bring autistic support and life skills downstairs. We talked about putting in a large group instruction room at the edge of the 6th grade wing that the whole building could use, but also it is at an edge where the 7th and 8th graders don't need to go through the 6th grade wing to get to that space. So those are some of the key points that came out of our building programming discussions. If you flip to the next page, this is a list of quantities of rooms, room sizes for the entire building. And we put this in here. This is just for reference document. I'm not going to go through this line by line or anything like that. We just put it in here. This captures everything that we talked and the quantity of rooms that we used to build the schematic design floor plans. Is there any questions on the building programming information I summarized before we talk about plans?
At this time, if I recall, IMS does not have a large group instruction room.
That's correct.
So this would provide the building with a large group instruction room,
Yes.
which is really good.
Yep.
So you have this arranged in groupings of 4 to support 4 teacher teams. In the presentation, you get...
Yeah, that was a typo. It really should say teams, because that's still a debate. And it's even in the strategic plan, a suggestion of going to 5 teams. So I put it in, he took it out. I printed, he didn't. So it's teams.
Okay.
It's teams.
We don't
Okay.
know, we don't know whether there's going to be 4 or 5 teams,
Correct.
but it's teams.
Correct.
But the
So-
plans that you're putting forth will accommodate either.
Yes. Well, it doesn't matter if it's a 4-person team or a 5-person team. The arrangement is based around 4 classrooms.
Yeah, you don't need 5 classrooms for a 5-person team.
Okay.
Good question, though.
So the special instruction spaces, the ones in the blue, some of them are new and some of them already exist.
Yeah, I'll show you that when we go to the plans.
Okay, thank
but
you.
This is just meant to capture everything in the building.
Okay.
Okay? So we put in, before we talk about the proposed plans, we put in here the existing floor plans, just to orient everybody a little bit to the building. So that's what these next, the 3 next pages are in your packet. And, this is where the main entrance is, to orient everybody. So you come in the main entrance, you go around the main office, down this hallway, and this is where we are proposing for the new 6th grade classroom area to be, if you can follow my cursor on the screen. And one of the things that you'll see when we look at the plans is that we are going to reconfigure that area completely. There is some significant layout and efficiency, I guess, deficiencies with the way that this plan is arranged here. I mean, we have a really tight, narrow hallway here. We also have a number of classrooms that you just can't get to unless you go through another space. So rearranging the rooms will allow us to really maximize the efficiency of all the space and get as many usable classrooms as we can. So I'm going to flip ahead. I'm not going to really go over the second floor at all. We just have it in here for reference. So I'm going to flip ahead to our proposed plans and walk you guys through these.
Bless you.
Bless you.
So I'm going to start with talking about our main focus, which was to look at what would we want to renovate to move 6th grade into this building. And that would be these green spaces here on the right. The green spaces represent general instruction classrooms, your math rooms, your reading rooms, your science rooms, your English rooms. Those are your general instruction. And so you can see, as we've been talking about, the 4 classroom pods, 3-4 classroom pods, like we've been talking about. I mentioned earlier about autistic support and life skills. They would come down from the 2nd floor. Those are these 2 gray spaces here. We would have an additional green classroom that could be used for a number of things that would provide some flexibility in 6th grade scheduling. Maybe it's a introduction to world language classroom, but it's an additional space for 6th grade. At the end of the 6th grade wing, here's where we were planning for the large group instruction. So if teachers wanted to use this stair here, which is at the edge, at the end of the 7th grade, 8th grade wing upstairs, they could just simply come down this stair, lead their classroom into the large group instruction without having to, disrupt the whole 6th grade wing by traveling down this hallway. Jumping to the other side of the 6th grade wing, we have a couple learning support classrooms. And then in order to really maximize the use of space, we're showing a reconfiguring this maker space in here, making it a larger space, and just improving that maker space there. So this red box you can see on your plans here, this is the scope for the 6th grade portion of the project. At the same time that we were looking at, our first goal was what do we need to do to renovate for 6th grade? We also took a look at what would make sense to also renovate in this building, as a part of the longer term approach. The feasibility study mentioned about $30 million of renovations for this building. So we also tried to identify what do we want to recommend to also be included with the 6th grade project that would either be most efficient to do with 6th grade or indirectly or directly affects the work for the 6th grade. So to the left of the green area, you'll see this purple area right here. And that is the administrative suite. And what we took a look at doing was creating a secure vestibule. That's what you'll see here. We created a secure vestibule. But in order to make that secure vestibule work the best that it can, we had to reconfigure some of the, really all of the administrative suite. We also included an additional assistant principal office that, that through discussions with the district administration seems to be a need for that when we go to 3 grades. So that purple area is a new administrative suite, a new secure vestibule, and then with an additional office for an additional assistant principal. The last thing on this floor plan that I want to point out to you all is up at the top here. If you're familiar with the building, there is a large ramp that takes you from the first floor to the second floor. That ramp has a couple issues where it's not handicap accessible. It's pretty steep, so that's the reason it's not. I should have led with that. That's the reason it's not handicap accessible. It's too steep, according to today's code. Kids also tend to run down that ramp because it is so steep. So what we're proposing, since we are moving all of 7th and 8th grade upstairs, is to take that ramp out and put in a stair that would be code compliant and would provide a code compliant means of egress from the building, as well as an elevator adjacent to it to serve that second floor, since that would be your, now you have a fully handicap accessible second floor. So those are all these bubbles that you see around the floor plan, that's the story they all try to tell. And before I go on and talk at all about the little bit of work we're showing upstairs, just wanted to pause here and see if you guys had any questions.
As far as the maker spaces go, where like how they were versus how they are,
Yeah.
We're talking about a renewed and heightened focus on STEAM. Obviously, as we're doing that, a lot of the components that go into the maker space are going to make a big difference. But looking just from the footprints, are we really gaining any space in the maker space? Because while we're expanding the one, we're eliminating another. So are we going to have adequate space for the renewed focus?
I can talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
Okay. So, yeah, again, all in very much conceptual drawing here and ideas, but that front classroom, Mrs. Heasley is just one of the fabulous people at our building. She worked hard at getting some grant money, but that front classroom was the least touched room. So that back room is where we put a lot of the money, was in the main library space and that back room. And then if you look to the room to the left of the library, of course, most of that's not being touched at all, but that front room, if you remember being in my building, that front room has some amenities that are nice, like a whole white wall. But other than that, it's much more of a classroom. It's the other rooms that are much more makerspace. Okay.
Can you explain more about the elevator that would have to be put in here? Mm-hmm. Are we're going to hit foundation in here and all that other kind of stuff, because that's not putting an elevator to get kids to the gymnasium either, correct?
Correct. Yes, it would only be for the first and second floor. But, this is where you're going to have the most traffic from kids wanting to go to their classrooms and going in a wheelchair up and down. You do have access. It's not like if you were to get injured in the gym, for example, and you needed to get out of the building, there is exit to grade at the gym. But with the frequency of kids traveling up and down in this area to go to the specials, to go to those shop rooms of the family consumer science, I think the elevator makes a lot of sense to be in the classroom area.
Well, my only concern is in the old one, there's a health and cardio fitness on the first floor for those that are in autistic support and those kinds of things, where they would not have to use the elevator. Currently, they can travel down the ramp. I think Mr. Minch could maybe help me address this. But there is no way now, unless we have something else, for the kids to get to the gym from the main first floor for wheelchair accessibility, those kinds of things.
So accessibility to the gym is still not solved with this schematic.
And I just have concerns about this. If we're doing this much renovation, we need to figure out how that.
We do have a mobile elevator, but yeah, that's,
Yeah, the future plan and the other $20 million that'll be spent in the future, an elevator to the gym will be built in the gym wing. That's the proposed plan.
So my next question is, could there be an elevator built on the side by the music that does all 3 floors, and we don't have 2 elevators, we have 1, and eliminate a $20 million cost?
No. First of all,
Okay.
I think what Mike said when he first opened is that you're looking at tonight just 10 of a $30 million project.
Okay.
The other 20 would be all these other spaces, bringing them up to code, bringing them up to 21st century. But the expectation they had since they started was, what's it going to take to put 6th grade here? If we had to move 6th grade, what do we need to do? We didn't get them looking at the other spaces yet.
Okay.
So we don't have to do the stairwell to get 6th grade up there, correct? We don't have to change the ramp.
correct.
Okay.
Okay, that
So-
was my next question. Thank you, Mrs.
So,
Douglas.
but to Mrs. Turner's point, what would be the drawbacks of putting that elevator closer to the gym to give access to all 3 floors as opposed to where you're talking about putting it?
Yes, we looked at that. So when you look at number of stops in an elevator, you've got, for 3 floors, you've got 3 stops, and you're going to have a certain amount of cost, generally speaking, $150,000 to $200,000 per floor. So what we looked at is if the only location, as you guys have commented on, that accesses all 3 floors would be back in the music wing, which is very inconvenient for the handicapped kid trying to use the elevator to get and use the building. So our thinking was to put an elevator right in the middle of the academic wing where they'd be using it the most, and then eventually, in the second phase of the work, put in an elevator that would serve the lower level at the gym. And the differential in cost would be probably $50,000 to $75,000, but for a 30-year building, it's going to help it work better. That was the thinking.
So as we're, I guess, as a board pondering this, I think that we need to consider whether the temporary inconvenience of students who are handicapped having to go further across the building for access to an elevator
Right.
outweighs the inconvenience of not being able to access the gym at all unless we go outside. So, I mean, I understand the concerns, but if we're talking about other renovations down the road, it may be more pertinent to give them access to every part of the building in the first stage and then worry about convenience in the second stage.
Yeah. Well, again, I'll ask Dr. Gensanti and Dave to comment on it. We had this discussion when we were looking at where the elevator goes. And again, the thought was not having the handicapped kids feel like they're being marginalized by making them travel. So maybe the administrators could address that.
Well, I think I would just say that that's why we have these meetings, right? And we're having this discussion, and, we have looked at it both ways. I would agree over a 30-year span, having that direct accessibility near the academic side of the building is going to be used, very often, multiple times a day. In the future part of the renovation, I think if we're just looking at 1 floor, I think that's the most ideal way to do it. But I can see how doing 1 3-floor elevator looks attractive. But with the drawbacks that we just talked about, that's what we have to weigh.
So when we're talking about future renovations, how far into the future are we talking?
No idea. I mean,
I
that's
mean-
part of the problem really is we're a little cart before the horse tonight,
Right.
talking about one slice of a larger facility master plan that could lay out over years, but the board has to kind of take a deep dive into all of those 11 options, how
Right.
to stage them or space them timing-wise to get us to the end of what needs to be a K-8 facilities renovation project. So I don't have an answer to that question because we have to put it all into the larger puzzle of the
Right.
whole feasibility master plan.
I think it's safe to say, I mean, the way I think of it is, 3 to 8 years maybe, but it's, I mean, either way, whether it's even 8 years, it's not that far away. The building's already been like this for 40 years, 30 years. So.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the concerns about students being marginalized, the inconvenience to the academics, but as I said, just for the board to ponder as we're going forward, is the inconvenience there, does that outweigh the inaccessibility to spaces within the building? And which one, I guess there are questions that we need to kind of go over is which one actually marginalizes these students more or prevents them from accessing the whole education.
Right.
Just a visual for you to look, when you look at the map. So to the point of what we're talking about, if you think of yourself as a 7th and 8th grader, when are you going to go downstairs? You're going to go downstairs for lunch. You're going to go downstairs for unified arts, okay? You're going to use it at the beginning and the end of the day. So if you have the elevator over by the gymnasium, all those things are going to have you going to one of the furthest parts of the building to backtrack to in all those cases, no matter what unified art you have. Not so far for lunch, but, for unified arts. So I think that's part of the consideration. If you look at the map, like if you were located.
Yeah.
Dr. Gensandi, I'm going to ask you, I mean, you were involved at the high school. Again, my experience, our experience as a firm is that, accessibility advocates will want the elevator where we're showing it, not tucked into a corner. So Dr. Gensandi, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I could just comment quickly because originally when we laid out the high school and we talked about elevators, there was only one car. And we talked about the importance of having 2 cars for a number of reasons, but really the accessibility piece was in the center of the school as much as possible. And we ended up putting an additional elevator in the phys ed wing, much like it's going to look really much like IMS, the same kind of philosophy, and that's the way it works too. And the use is really, really shown in the heart of the school, in the academic wing. And so the ancillary usage of going to phys ed, remember phys ed in many cases, like at the high school, is only 1 semester, and it's not all year long. I don't know at the middle level, Dave, if it's all year long. Phys ed, is it all year long at the middle level or just a semester?
It's every other day.
Every other day. So, okay, so it's basically a semester, but in every other day format. So what I mean by that is the regular use would be, and the most use and the most efficient use would be in the middle of the building. So.
But I'd also say that if the board's concerned, I mean, again, you've had no accessibility to gymnasium, I mean, beyond what you have now for 35 years. If the board is concerned about that being an issue, our recommendation would be then let's go forward with the second elevator now to serve the gym.
Yeah.
So, just as a point of clarification, Mr. Minch, what do we do now to get kids to the gym?
That's an excellent question. Yeah. Right now, what we do, which I will say, it's very rare that we've had a wheelchair student in the building. I think maybe twice since my time there.
Oh, okay.
But we do use the mobile elevator when we have to use that. And I will say we've also used the outside access.
What's a mobile elevator?
So it's a tracked elevator. If you go down our stairs, you'll see 2 rails on the side of the wall, and basically, if
like
you think
a chairlift.
a chairlift, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, I get it. Okay.
Yeah.
So was the health and cardio fitness room in this the plan that we have now, is that used for?
So I think that's another excellent point. And the best way to say it is if you ever moved from a smaller house to a bigger house, all of a sudden you find you've filled all the space, right? That you never thought you'd fill because you got this big house, right?
Right.
So what we did years ago, we had the space available, and we said, let's make good use of this space. And so we made it an adaptive PE room.
Okay.
Now, in reality, the adaptive PE room gets used 1 to 2 times a day. Okay? So I think it's all very fair conversation, but I wanted you to know how we got there,
Yeah.
how much it's used,
Okay.
and can we replicate that even in the gymnasium itself, or maybe in another space on the plan.
Okay, I was just wondering, because Ms. Turner brought up the fact that it's no longer there. So I was wondering regarding the plan, I'm assuming that the autistic support, sensory, and life skills is in the middle there because of the bathrooms? Or is there a reason why you separated the 6th grade and they can't go to the other side? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, so one of the things that we talked a lot about with special education is not putting them in the corner, essentially.
Right.
They want to be in the flow of everything. And I think what this does is you have a separate entrance for autistic support on a separate hallway than life skills. So you don't ever feel like you're in a special ed area, and they're in the center part of a academic wing, versus putting them like where the large group instruction is, or putting them where the learning support classrooms are. They're going to feel like they're off to the side. So
Well, when you say they have their own entrance, you're talking about
so there's
where that
yeah, so there's
opening is, that's to the outside of the building, and they enter the building that way?
no. So I meant from the hallway. If you're coming to autistic support, you're going to come down and you're going to come in this way. If you're coming to life skills, you're going to come around the corner and come in this way. So you're never really coming to the same spot to go to special education, so it doesn't feel like it's like a pod. Even though it looks like a pod when you look at a floor plan, it's not going to feel that way in a building because the doors are on such different hallways.
But isn't that a door to the outside?
It is.
That is also another benefit of putting it here. They have access right to the exterior. Life skills does. Yes.
Okay, that's what I was asking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
To get back to the elevator, what would the cost be then if you did both elevators? Because I think that we have to make sure that I don't care if it's one kid, like we have to make sure every single kid can get to all floors, accessibility throughout the whole building.
Sure, and again, we'll go over. So we can do anything the board wants us to do in terms of the design. We were kind of charged with looking at a scope of about $10 million, and that's what, again, later on in the evening we'll do that. I think the big picture is a $30 million renovation is going to make the entire building fully accessible. The issue is, when does the board want to go there? From a code standpoint and from a building permitting standpoint, we do not have to make the building entirely accessible right now in this phase. You have to make the area that's renovated accessible, which we're going to be doing. So again, it's just what the board would like. If you'd like to spend more money now and move towards more fully accessible, you can. Again, part of it is just balancing. The building has not been fully accessible for 35 years. So how fast do we want to rectify everything? And it's a matter of money, and we're happy to follow the board's direction.
Again,
Mike,
I'm sorry. I don't know what the cost would be, but I think that should be a priority, a very high priority, that every single kid has access to the entire building. It's only fair for them to have equal access across the whole building. So I think we need to think about that, and we need to try to do something quickly about that and look at the cost. It's only fair. If it's one family in the entire community, how are they going to feel that they can't access certain areas? So I think we really need to do something about that.
It
Sure.
sounds to me like they do, though.
But you can't,
They use the
okay, so here's the situation, and having a kid play sports there, you're well aware of this too. At one point in time, you couldn't get all the way around to the back. So if you had a grandparent that wanted to come and watch a 7th or 8th grader play basketball, it's a huge trek down the hill on the back of the thing, into the gym, all of that area, and then getting them into the gym. If you had an elevator, you could bring them in the front entrance right in front of the cafeteria and down there, and they're in the gym. Did I make, am I right?
Yes,
You
and
just open one door to get into a gym. You don't
No.
open every door in the school to get into
But
the
you,
gymnasium.
but what I'm saying is access for those that have needs, or those that are in wheelchairs, or those that have walkers, or and any of that kind of stuff, to get to the gym is very difficult, even going in the back entrance.
And just to be clear, no one's saying not to do that. What I think Ken said, Mr. Nagel said it very well. We're talking about how to make it most accessible
Correct.
in the stages of this project, so
But
that students can get the benefit that Mr. Scalzo is talking about all day long, right? So we're talking about the academic component, and then we're talking about the phys ed component.
But in the phys ed component, also would push that elevator to the exit area, so that they would be able to come down the foreign language wing if they're upstairs, go down that elevator and get out the doors closer to where they would catch a bus.
That's definitely an option.
Okay.
It's definitely an option.
And that would be adding, I agree with Mr. Scalzo, adding both elevators at this point in time.
So,
So I think that since most of our discussion is around a second elevator, you guys came up with a pretty good plan.
Well, and I think you bring up a great point, and that is we were looking to move 6th grade over and what it takes to move 6th grade over if and when we do that. And, you know, I just want to just quickly say that where we got as far as the presentation tonight took multiple meetings, involved a ton of folks. Hayes Design Group, I think they were masterful in involving all the key stakeholders in this process. This isn't just a drawing or something that just kind of evolved and they did it on their own. They got feedback from all of us. We had, in the meetings, we had Dr. Walsh, we had Mr. McCausland, we had Dr. O'Rourke, we had Mr. Minch, we had Mr. Fierce, we had Dr. Shue, we had Mr. Patterson, we had John Kramer, we had Mrs. Figlioli, Mike, Kevin, his group, different engineers came in and met with us. So it took a lot of meetings. We had 7 meetings from August 18th, this is in-person meetings, to September 15th. 7 large meetings that involved all the stakeholders. So and our next step is we're going to involve the faculty as far as if we were to move, what would you need? That's really where we are right now. So once again, we're just in the preliminary stages of doing all this.
And I agree with Mr. Christensen, if we're all arguing over an elevator, everything else
Yeah,
must.
and I
So
don't want to say it's not time to
a good
do
job,
that,
it's
but that's where we are right now. Yeah.
One question I had on this plan, and since we're Mr. Minch, you mentioned that the students will have access to maybe some services that they didn't have at Neal. I guess the question I had from an operating cost standpoint, and maybe not so much in this interim step, but where does this take us there? I mean, can we offer those more, like, say, specialized services, things like that, enrichment things at maybe more economically than we could at IMS, especially since at Neal, especially since Neal is really operating as 2 different educational models in the same building?
Yeah. So if I understand your question correctly, you're saying, what's the impact to the operating cost of moving
Right.
to 6th grade? I think you'll see, less sharing of staff. I think you'll see, being able to staff, as an example, the remediation math program with existing staff that we have on site. So to sit here today and talk about absolutes would be impossible, but I do see the operating costs being more towards a savings side to some extent, just because we're not going to have to share, the staff, and we'll be able to staff some of these things with people that we have existing.
Yeah.
Okay.
The one thing I really like about this plan is that you don't have to go through a classroom to get to another classroom. I mean, when I used to teach and was in that building, I could not believe, I mean, it just doesn't seem safe to me that you had to go through a classroom to get to another classroom. And it didn't make a lot of sense. But I do know that there's a lot of traffic that goes up and down that ramp. And so, I mean, that's the main access for all the students. They don't usually use the stairwells at the far end of the building or over near the music and the foreign language and so forth. So
Right.
I guess you did a study in terms of numbers of students going up and down that during the typical
didn't
day
do it.
or in the morning or at night, and you think the stairs will be
Oh,
enough?
the stairs will be way better for movement of kids. And we didn't do
Okay.
a formal study, but we certainly talked to Dave, who knows that building like the back of his hand. And yes, that ramp is at a key location for movement of kids. And the stair will facilitate it better than the ramp.
Mrs. Dobis, when I went to IMS, we weren't allowed to use anything but the ramp. The stairwells were all closed off to us.
Well, I just,
And I was
to
6
me-
through 8 at that time, so in the mid-'80s, you couldn't use anything but the ramp. Ask your wife.
But
And,
but I'm just asking architecturally, because to me, a ramp moves people,
It
moves
does.
more people than a stair.
It,
And so that's sort of what my question is.
yeah, and the answer is not really.
Okay.
Ramps, and again, that ramp, I don't know. I haven't talked to one teacher or administrator in a school that likes that ramp because it does encourage the kids to run and they can't control them. So, and they're middle school kids. So, it's like a little bit of a demolition derby at times. So, from that standpoint, I mean, the stair's going to be very generous. I mean, I think it's about.
It'll be a 10-foot wide stair. I
Yeah,
mean, they're
you-
going to get down the stairs a lot quicker than they were getting down that ramp. And
Right.
safely.
Because it's more vertical.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's just going to be a much
It'll
safer
be a time
and
saver.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
But again, that was the only way you could go at that point in time, so.
Mr. Hayes,
Yes.
again, to go back, I don't know if you gave a number or not, but roughly, how much would it cost to add the second elevator, roughly?
I don't know, but we'll have that answer for the next meeting. I mean, I would say, again, you're talking about $150,000 to $200,000 per stop. So I think you're probably talking the second elevator is going to be about $200,000,
200,000, roughly?
250, 300,000, again.
Somewhere in
Again,
there.
it all depends. I mean,
We either spend
again,
it now or spend it later.
Ms. Turner was correct. We do have to look at the structural implications, et cetera, but roughly speaking, you're talking an elevator is going to be $300,000, $400,000.
300 to 400.
And it's really an acceleration moving up that expense because.
Correct, I was gonna say, right.
You do it anyway.
It's
Yeah.
pay me now or pay me later. And that's, when we get to the budget, the opinion of probable cost, we can talk, I mean, that's, we wanted to put a marker on the table and get the board's input on that, so. And again, we were just initially targeting about 10 million, so.
I'm going to
yeah.
also echo what Mrs. Dobis said. I had a classroom where I had to walk through the classroom, walk through the second classroom, and go in a side door to get to a history class. So, again, liking the fact that every room has its own door and its own hallway is and how it kind of mimics a lot of the upstairs, except the only thing I didn't see was a teacher's area in the sixth grade area. Can we?
There is actually, right there, we're circling.
Okay,
it
so
on-
it's not like the ones in the pods are now, where each pod upstairs has their, correct me if I'm wrong, each pod upstairs has their own teacher's wing for collaboration, correct?
That is correct. I do think that will be a nice situation, though, for the teachers there.
Right,
do.
so
It's-
each team would have their own, I don't know how you fix that in the in the space we have, but each team
Right.
has their own meeting room.
Right, and again, the size, again, I'll just be blunt, we did what we could with the space. We're actually, and I think I'm speaking for our design team as well as the administrators, are very happy with the way the plan worked out. If you can read a plan, and not everybody can well, but it is self-evident if you compare this plan to the existing plan which we put in there. I mean, the existing plan is a maze, right? I mean, and
Correct.
most of you have lived it because you went to the school and had to go through rooms to get through. I mean, it's really bad. This plan cleans up circulation, organizes the spaces really well. Again, if the teachers, again, I'll let the administrator speak to this more than us, but our experience is you can go team teaching planning rooms. They're pluses and minuses. The more teachers you get together in team planning, the more basically cross-fertilization you have. And again, Mrs. Dobis can comment on this as a former teacher. But so, having all sixth grade teachers in one room, I don't see it as being a problem. If they want to be apart, you can simply schedule it where they're using it at different times, or you can have different pods within that room. That's a pretty large room. You can create pods within it. So I think it gives them flexibility, and I don't think there's really a huge advantage one way or the other. So.
Sorry to bring it back around to the elevator, but I'm really stuck on ensuring all of our students have adequate access to all of our resources.
Sure.
Mr. McCausland, is there any, we're talking $200,000 to $300,000 price tag roughly. This is without, doing the homework and the research. I understand that completely. Sure. But is there any grant money or ESSERS money available, since this is a handicapped accessible issue that will be taking place during the renovation?
Typically, the ESSERS money is pretty much set aside for environmental type issues within your buildings and not really handicap accessibility. So I don't think that it would qualify for that.
What about other grant opportunities?
I haven't explored any other grant opportunities. I mean, it's certainly something we can do, but we will be talking about bond structuring to fund these projects with the next presentation.
Okay, and Mr. Hayes, as you alluded to earlier, when we start these renovations, there's an obligation to upgrade certain portions to be code compliant for today's building codes. If we were to do that in that wing with the additional elevator, would it trigger any other requirements in that particular wing that we may not be aware of?
That's a really good question, which I can't answer right now. I don't believe it will.
I don't think it would.
Yeah, I mean, typically it's if you're renovating an area, if we're only touching literally a 10 by 10 portion of an area, I don't believe that'll trigger the requirement that the rest of the area become accessible.
I mean, the biggest thing is we're making the building better, and that's how they'll look at it from a code perspective too. You don't have an accessible means to get to the lower floor, you're adding it. So they're not going to punish you by making you go into the bathroom and the music suite and make, swap out all the toilet partitions or something like that. So.
Generally, that's the way it is.
Yeah.
The other thing I really like about the plan is that you're going to have a secure vestibule right now as you enter the building. Maybe, Mr. Minch, you could speak to that a little bit.
Well, definitely there was many considerations, but that was a pretty high priority to secure that area and make the traffic go through the office for a gateway to the student population. Yes.
Yeah, I'm real pleased with that, and I love the idea of having a large group instruction area for the building. I know the one at the high school is used all the time for many different things. The access is a little bit on the far side of the building, but it is what it is. So is there a door out to the outside from that large group instruction room? It looks like there is.
There is. And actually, there's some advantage. I mean, we will do the HVAC and electrical so that, again, that could be a community meeting room in the evening if the school district wanted it to be that way.
Nice.
Where you could access it from the parking lot and use it without access to the rest of the building.
So I know we paused. Were we going into the tower presentation, or is this pretty much? Because I have questions once we get to that point also.
No, we're going to continue going through the booklet. So if the board's ready, we can do that.
So I did want to talk about the second floor just a little bit. our goal here was to do the least amount of work possible on the second floor. But as we've talked about, this area over here is where we have is where autistic support and life skills is today. So one of the things that we're showing in this phase 1 related to the 6th grade project would be to convert those special ed classrooms into world language rooms. And when we talk about the budget in a little bit, one of the things that we're looking at is maybe the base bid is just do the minimum amount of work we have to do in those rooms to make them function as classrooms. And then come back later when you want to renovate the second floor and fully renovate those spaces. So we'll show you that a little bit when we look at the budget. The other thing, a couple other little things up here, we created a speech room here where an old copy room was, and then we're just showing building a smaller copy room right outside it in this large hallway where there's just extra space. And then finally, just these double toilet rooms here and these double toilet rooms here, we're showing renovate those in this phase 1, mainly because you'd have to get above the ceilings on the first floor in order to renovate those spaces with all the plumbing. So while we have the ceilings down on the first floor, let's go ahead and renovate those rooms up on the second floor, make them fully handicap accessible, and the fixtures and everything in those rooms, they're original to the building, so they're ready to be replaced anyway. But and again, that's something we'll show when we talk about the budget. You don't have to do it now, but from an efficiency standpoint, we think it makes a lot of sense. So I think that's everything here up on the second floor. And if you don't have any questions on this floor, I'll go to the next couple pages. Okay.
What's core skills in 21st century learning in the blue? What does that? It used to be a conference room and a special education room.
That's a STEM-based course.
Okay.
That we have for 7th and 8th grade.
Okay, good.
All right. So the next page was just in there for reference to show you the ground floor. I'm jumping down to the document that's titled Scope of Work Summary. And we've talked a lot about what's listed here in the architectural just by going through the floor plans. So I'm not going to read through each one of these. I do want to touch on some of the HVAC, plumbing, and electrical in here. And the way this document was really organized was that the HVAC piece is things that are related to the 6th grade renovation, as well as maybe something else we looked at that is tied to the 6th grade renovation, but it's not exactly in the 6th grade renovation that we think you should look at doing as part of phase 1. So looking at HVAC, the first line item there, that's all the HVAC equipment that would be replaced within the 6th grade area below the roof. And I say below the roof because we would keep the rooftop units, the air handling units that serve that part of the building, as they probably have somewhere between 5 and 10 years left of life, and they can be replaced when you do the second phase and not affect anything with this first phase. So because they are only about 10 years old, we think let's keep the rooftop units, replace everything below them. So that's what line item 1 is. Line item 2 under HVAC, the boilers, the boiler plant. When we say boiler plant, we're talking boilers, flues, piping, everything associated with the boilers is original. So 48 years old, 49 years old at this point. And so when you get close to 50, that's the danger zone with those. So they're at the end of their expected life. So since the hot water boiler plant will serve some of the equipment in the 6th grade area, we think let's try to replace that now with the 6th grade project. Jumping down to plumbing, trying to use the trackpad there. We would replace all the plumbing fixtures in the toilet rooms that are within the work area. We would add a sprinkler system in the 6th grade area and set it up so that we could add a fire sprinkler system, tap into that fire sprinkler system and expand it throughout the rest of the building when the rest of the building is renovated in the future. Replace 2 aging or at the end of their useful life domestic water heaters in the mechanical room, and then look at, again, the last line item on plumbing would be to renovate those replace all the toilet fixtures in those second floor toilet rooms. And then finally here, under the electrical scope of work, we would provide a new fire alarm system that would be code compliant in the 6th grade area. Any of the renovated areas would have new LED lights, new electrical outlets, new data outlets, those types of things. And provide a new paging system throughout the 6th grade area. And then lastly, just new classroom AV and technology in the renovated areas. So this is the high-level scope of work summary. The next, I want to say 8 pages or so, or more detailed backup for you guys just to read through that I wasn't intending to go through it all tonight. I just wanted to hit on these high-level things on this scope of work summary here.
But I will simply say on the 8 pages that follow, there's been a lot of work, a lot of options looked at. Again, we're still at the beginning stages of design, but there's been a lot of thought given to this already. Again, we've been working with district administrators on this as well. Again, Nick Fierst and John Kramer included. And again, our overall goal was, what do we know we're going to need to do, and what makes the most sense from a cost and value standpoint to do now? There's just some things that is going to save you money to do now versus later. Those are some of the things we're saying you could do. But again, in order to give the board options, you'll see in the alternates, you don't have to do them if the cost seems too high. So we'll just leave it at that. And then if you want to flip through, we can get to the costs.
So before we do that, I'll just summarize my questions on the engineering and the scope of work. So in essence, for that wing, this is going to be a complete gut and rebuild.
Correct.
Okay. Not reusing any existing.
No, not that
That's correct. I mean, everything in that area is either original or it's from 1990, what was it, 1991 maybe? So, yeah, nothing's been touched since it was renovated in the early 90s. Okay. And if they didn't decide to renovate in the early 90s, that means it's from, what, 1973 or something like that, so.
Okay, can we get clarification for those that are listening that in 1990, the major renovations, and Mr. Minch, you can help me with this, because I was moving to the high school at the time. I said I wanted clarification for those that are listening and others, the renovations that were done in the 1990s.
Sure.
We moved the cafeteria from the upstairs to the downstairs, and we moved the office from where the cafeteria is to where it is currently. Were there any other major we put the classrooms then up in the cafeteria area. Were there any other major renovations done in 1990?
Not since then.
And those were the only technically 3 items that were moved in 1990, correct?
That I know of,
yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm going to fast forward a little bit through these narratives to get us down to the second to last page in your booklet. If you want to flip to the second to last page, we can look at the opinion of probable cost for what we've talked about so far. All right.
And if I can, Mike, I'm just going to jump in for a moment and just help the board. So we're at the schematic design level of conceptual cost, and these are order of magnitude costs that get us in the ballpark. At each stage beyond this, so we're going to move into design development after schematic design. We're going to get more information on the scope, and the pricing is going to be able to be more exact. And then we're eventually going to get to construction document phase, which are the drawings that go out to bid and what contractors will use to bid. Those will be extremely detailed, probably 100 to 115 drawings, 1,000 pages of specifications. At about the 70%, the construction manager that will be hired will do a detailed estimate of those drawings, and again, the cost will get even more exact. So again, you kind of start wide and you keep moving in as more information is known. So.
All right, so just to orient everybody to what you're looking at here, that the items in black, A, B, C, and D, those are items that we've kind of projects within the project that we've talked about being in the base bid. So the renovation of the first floor area for the 6th grade, the administrative suite and the secure vestibule, the ramp, stair, and elevator conversation we were having, converting the world language or the special education rooms upstairs into world language, A, B, C, and D. Those are items that we think should be in the base bid, and we put a cost to those in the right side that you can see. In red there, we identified recommended alternates, just to give you some flexibility on the budget. So item E there, the first one, that is what I was alluding to earlier. That's the additional cost to fully renovate those special education rooms, so you don't have to go into them again in the future. Again, you don't have to do that. F is the hot water boiler plant that I was talking about. That's 48, 49 years old. The water heaters that I mentioned under the plumbing scope of work, again, at the end of their useful life, but you can still just maintain those until you're ready to do phase 2 of the renovations. And then H would be those second floor toilet rooms that we thought from efficiency standpoint made sense to do now versus waiting to do those in the future. So if you take all the black items above that, the red items, and then you look at item J there, the design and inflation contingency, what that is we put a contingency for a portion of that is for the design for things that we haven't developed yet because we are only in schematic design. And then another portion of that is for inflation. This project wouldn't bid until January, so we put a little bit of an inflation factor in our numbers, knowing that we're not bidding it tomorrow. So if you look at all the red and all the black total, they total a little over $9 million. What we try to do with this whole budget here is we try to give you an all-in, a look at everything all in. So below this, we have a construction contingency. This would be during construction, unforeseen conditions, things that, we're working with an existing building, things that aren't evident on existing drawings that we might uncover as we open up walls. We're showing 10% at this point. We strive to manage, usually for our projects to be below 3, and typically our projects are in that 1.5 range. So, but at this stage of where we're at in the planning, 10% makes a lot of sense for now. We have a placeholder in there for architectural and engineering fees, another placeholder for a construction manager fee, and then towards the bottom here, we have a list of variable costs that all just budget numbers for additional costs that would be associated with the project to help build an all-in budget number for you to look at. And so when you get to the very bottom there, you'll see that everything we've talked about and the soft costs that we've gone over is close to 12 million, 11.8, and then below that in red is the cost if you were to deduct all those alternates that are up there in red. So that's closer to a $10 million project. And the last thing I'll just point out, at the very bottom, you can see that we are in schematic design and we're showing almost $2 million worth of contingency at this point, baked into those numbers. So that's the summary. And if do you guys have any questions on the budget documents?
Just real quick, number 1, for the hazardous material removal, is that an added contingency or is that a minimum cost? That is more of a contingency, I would say, at this point. We want to hold something aside in case we find some things that we want to remove. I'm sorry. Is $75,000 a reasonable amount for a building that has components that are so old that predate?
Yeah,
like
so
a lot of the asbestos.
I think if we were flying completely blind, it might not be. But we did start an environmental investigation, and we do have some behind-the-scenes knowledge of where we're at right now. The report isn't done. We don't know everything, but we have a good feeling about what they've uncovered at this point that I think we're comfortable with that number right now. It's not a complete guess or anything like that at this point, so.
So the next page, if you turn the page, is just give you an idea of where we're headed. And so the hope would be that in the middle of November, we'd come back with design development. So that's 6 weeks of intense work by all the professionals, again, continuing to work with district administrators and staff to move the design forward that you've seen tonight and get much more information with regards to the design of the components of the project. And then eventually, beyond that, it would be construction documents. And again, if we continue to move forward, we would be bidding it in the early part of the year. Probably it's fair to say, and maybe for anybody listening, that the board will not commit to any work until you award contracts, which according to this schedule is going to be in the middle of March of next year. So you're not really committing to anything until you decide to award those contracts and make a commitment to the contractors. You will have our fees and some engineering costs and what we call soft costs, but 90% of the costs of this project are in construction costs. You will not make commitments to that until you award contracts.
So based on what you know right now, is this a project that can be completed in 2.5 months? Or what kind of impact could we be looking at right now to delaying the start of the school year next year?
Yes, all good questions. We've been talking with Dave primarily in terms of juggling that. So at this point, Mike, do you want to maybe comment on?
Yeah. So the short answer to your question is no. We would look at trying to start the work before the school gets out in April, maybe late April, somewhere around there. What we've been talking to Dave about is what would we do with some of those kids in the first floor of where our work area is? How could we get at least half of that wing vacated?
Right.
So that we could do some work while the kids are in the building. Maybe the work isn't happening during school hours or anything like that.
Right.
Maybe it happens after hours, but at least we could have access. When we have a nice situation where we have an exterior vestibule right there, so it could be a nice contractor-only entrance, give them that whole bottom half of the wing, and that's what Dave and I have been talking about, and it seems reasonable to be able to do that to buy us 2 more months of work, essentially.
Okay.
So.
Mr. Minch, what classes are there? There's not much in that area at this time. If I remember correctly, it's been a couple years, but.
So we're talking about the driveway side of the building. And so really what we'd be talking about is moving some of the team integrity classes across the hall into some of those open rooms over there, and probably utilizing some of the library classroom situations, as well as a couple, if you remember upstairs on the far right there's a few rooms we can tap into up there as well to make that side of the building accessible.
Okay.
Any further questions of anybody? A very thorough presentation, and thank you very much for all of the work that you put into this. Very detailed.
Thank you.
Mr. Spicuzza, do you want to move us into the next section?
I would be happy to, Mrs. Dobas. Thank you again, Mr. Hayes and team, for a great presentation today. Item number 4 under Facility and Services is a presentation on the board underwriting PNC Capital Markets from Alicia Henry.
Yeah, this is Doug. I'm going to chime in briefly. First, Alicia Henry is with PNC Capital Markets, and I asked her to put together tonight a couple scenarios for you, basically so you could see what the impact on your budget was going to be if you did a $10 million borrowing. But instead of just looking at that in isolation, we discussed the fact that you probably will have future borrowing in the future if you continue on with any of the options that you may choose from the feasibility study. So I had her run side by side with that a $43 million borrowing in the next couple years, or in the next year. So you can see the total impact over time with those borrowings. Again, these are all dependent on how many years you rent it out, what the rates are at the time. And certainly she can run any number of options you want run. This is just kind of to give you a flavor for what you might potentially be looking at And again, we still don't even know the size or scope of the project or the final cost of the project. So again, keeping that in mind, that was the purpose of this presentation, to just give you a flavor of what you might be looking at. With that, I will turn it over to Alicia.
Thank you, Mr. McCausland. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the school board and administration. Hopefully you can see before you a handout that I put together for this meeting. Can everyone see that clearly and hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. So as Doug mentioned, he asked me to prepare a $10 million bond issue that is right now dated for next May of 2022, and a $43 million bond issue that's now dated May of 2023. And please note, we just had to make some assumption for these dates. Also know that I didn't want to look at the $10 million, like Doug said, in a vacuum if you had future financing. So the only two differences between the two options I'm going to share with you this evening is that the first $10 million is solved in a wraparound method of amortization, and the second option will show you what a $10 million level amortization looks like. Just a little brief introduction to what a wraparound is. It's both of these amortization terms are a bit widely used with school district finance. When you do a wraparound, you are largely paying interest only till the rest of your bond issues have matured. A level amortization works exactly like your home mortgage, where you have a level amortization made of principal and interest. So starting going forward, on the left-hand side, you have your existing debt service. And your debt service goes out to 2034, which is very short compared to your peers, at just under $6.5 million. Next to it, I'm illustrating a $10 million wrap. If we would like to keep this bond issue bank qualified, which I think would be a benefit to the district, the proceeds available for the project is just under $9.5 million. This would give the district the ability to have bank qualified rates, which are slightly lower, and a short 5-year call feature. Then if you look below on the 22 bond debt service, you will say that the budget increase with a wraparound is modest. So the cost to your budget for $10 million is roughly $205,000 a year. If you follow that down the line, when your existing debt service pays off in fiscal year 34, you'll see that this bond begins to amortize, and it almost looks like a balloon payment. The first $10 million for this scenario would extend your debt 1.5 years out to 2036. Looking beside it, the $43 million wraparound. And again, please know that this May of 2023 is a hypothetical date. If we wrap around that bond issue, the cost of an additional $43 million is roughly $1.5 million. So at the end of the day, to do both of these projects, you're looking at a little over $1,720,000. The final term for the $43 million issue takes us out to 2041. So in this scenario, you still have a nice 20-year debt service picture. The one thing I do want to caution you is rates are really low today. I am being conservative by 0.5% to build in some buffer on the interest rates. So the all-in rates on the $10 million at a 2.47%, if we could sell bonds today, would be closer to a 197. And conversely, the $43 million that could be a few years away would be closer to a 237. So if those rates look high to you, they are. They do have some buffer in for the time and interest rate risk that is in front of you. Any questions on page 1? If not, if Zed could move to page 2. And And for those of you who don't like numbers, this is a nice visual chart. The black bars represent your existing debt. The striped orange lines represent the wraparound, which shows a very modest increase. And the dark orange bars indicate the $43 million wraparound. So it gets to an $8.1 million net debt service and extends your debt out to 2041. And we could move to page 3. We'll go through the second option. Again, this is going to be a mirror image of what we went through. The only change you're going to see is how you amortize the first $10 million, and just to see how that affects your payment going forward for future projects. So when you do a wraparound amortization, that is always the least expensive budgetarily, but the more expensive cost over the life, because you're really not amortizing any principal over that initial term. So for the level option at $10 million, you are getting a little bit more money for projects, $9.8 million by keeping it level and still keeping it bank qualified. Your interest rate is at 2.07. However, the budgetary impact is about $600,000 higher when you're amortizing the principal. Your increase for this $10 million is roughly $805,000 increase. And we're only extending the term. This is a 15-year term out to 2037. So the level cost on the $10 million is roughly $600,000 more. However, it would save you $1 million over the life of the issue over the wraparound scenario. Then when we wrap around the $43 million, again with the hypothetical date of May of 23, the cost is essentially the same on the second phase. Both of those are wraps. It gets you a net aggregate local share debt service when we're all said and done at roughly $8,750,000. And again, that's about $600,000 more than if you were to do a wraparound for both scenarios. In either scenario, you're really keeping your debt service still around the 21-year term. Again, virtually this is hard to do and talk about numbers, so I apologize. Does anyone have any questions or any points I could make more clear to you?
Quiet crew tonight.
I know. I think that the architect stole all the thunder and had all the exciting, and then I get to talk about how much it costs. And
Hey, Doug, I just had one question on the timing of the, how we go about, with this bond process relative to the construction process. When does this work happen? When does it start? And, kind of, how does it kind of follow with what we're doing with Hayes Group and the construction side of it?
Sure. You can really borrow the money at any time. If we decided that we had a price range we were comfortable with borrowing and how we wanted that borrowing to be structured, such as Alicia has just pointed out, then we could, Alicia would look at the market and she would tell us pretty much when it was the best time to go out there and actually pull the trigger, so to speak. We'd usually ask for an authorization from the board so that the superintendent and or I could pull the trigger when the time was right, so we wouldn't have to go back to the board for a separate resolution. And that way we would, once we know that we have the board's okay, then we could begin to prepare all the front end documents, granted borrowings, and we do all that front end work so we're ready when the market is really ready for that to occur. So it really can happen at any time.
at a minimum, a bond issue takes in an aggressive time frame 60 days. And 90 days looking conservatively. So you do want to sort of start the bond issue at a minimum at the early phase of your schedule that I saw previously on the Hayes design.
Alicia, would you say that the market is probably at a very good position right now versus waiting, 4 or 5 months, knowing that we're going through, cost possible changes with Congress and so on coming up, the markets may shift.
Yeah, there's a lot of concern with interest rates. Rates have been fairly low for so long. When I'm asked this, my inclination is to always say yes, I will tell you right now that the market for the first time in a few years really feels like it's about ready to move. And I think whether or not the infrastructure bill passes and Treasury or the federal government has some issues and shuts down, there is some concern that higher rates are closer than people realize.
And is the Treasury Department thinking about raising the prime rate? And there's been some, I thought I heard them talk about that.
Yeah, there is some talk. I'm not sure that that's imminent, but I think they're looking at moving up the rate sooner than anyone had thought.
Okay. So
I think if the board could get comfortable with an amount, I do say that there's a lot larger risk that rates go up than they go down, truthfully.
So yeah, I guess it would depend when the board is ready to determine if they're ready to move forward and what they want to borrow, and then we can go ahead and proceed and look for that authorization. And probably it'd be better to do it sooner in October than later. Is my recommendation.
No, I agree. My bigger concern is I would never want to lock the board in for them to not have enough funds. So if you could come to an amount that you're comfortable with, that would get you through a good year, 18 months. And if a future financing is imminent, even if you were short, you could pick up those funds with a second issuance down the road. I do think there is some value in sincerely looking at locking in rates sooner rather than later.
Right. Okay.
So I have a couple questions here. The first question I have is, maybe I missed something. Where did we get the $43 million price tag?
I just tend to tell you the truth. I gave that to Alicia, and all I did was look at some of the scope of the projects from the feasibility study, and some of the projects seem to fall into that $40 to $45 million range. It could be more, it could be less. I just wanted to be able to show you what the impact to your budget would be by doing multiple issues back to back, year to year. So I didn't want you to look at the 10 million as the example and think that's the only debt you're going to have. I thought it would be prudent to say, you're not just talking about the 10 million, you're talking about future phases. So
Okay.
that's how it was. It was just a sample to show you like there's a larger impact here that you have to think about.
Okay, so the second question is, as far as the $10 million wrap is a good way to frame this. If you look at all the costs up until 36, 37, or 35, 36, they're fairly low. But between 35, 36, we actually paid back in those 2 years more than we initially borrowed just in those 2 years. If we were to go with an option like that, how can we say we're better financially suited to pay basically the entirety back then as opposed to just paying it up front?
Because the rest of your debt service goes away, like from the high school.
Yeah, the idea of the wrap is to keep your budget fairly consistent and not have such a large millage impact to the community. So you're already paying $6.5 million. So if you only have a $200,000 impact and wait to make those large payments at the end of that issue, then you really don't have any millage impact to your budget whatsoever by doing that borrowing. Yes, you pay more interest over the life of it, but again, the millage impact to the taxpayer is pretty negligible.
And so you end up paying a premium of, when you compare those two scenarios, you end up paying a premium of about $1 million over the course of, 14 years or so?
Yes, that's correct.
Be able to level your budget out a little bit more during that total lifetime.
So, okay, I see. So what it does is it keeps the aggregate debt service fairly level
Yeah.
by backloading the payments.
So you're looking like, I don't know, $140,000 a year premium you pay just to be able to level your budget to be more consistent.
Okay.
So I mean, it's a good option to consider.
Yeah. No, I was just looking at that line on that service, and I was thinking if we're paying 10 million the last 2 years, if we get it then, why don't we just?
Right. I mean, and that's what Doug will have to look at is, as he lays out his budget, kind of revenue projections, if we can handle it, just, assume the full load right away. Yeah. Over the course of those 14 years, you save $1 million, so that's worth considering too.
And that's really going to be part of that long-range budgeting that we're starting to do, part of that master facilities plan. All of that's going to be wrapped into there so you can see the long-range impact of that. Remember that you have a limit on how much you can raise in any 1 year, so taking on additional debt, large sums of debt, could have a limitation on how much you can really raise millage to meet those requirements. And you have to remember too that we're in an era now where PlanCon doesn't exist, so you're not getting reimbursement for these borrowings. It's just not an option for us right now.
So I guess the last question I have goes back to that $43 million number and the idea that was just floated that we make a decision by next month. If we don't know, because we haven't finalized our feasibility plan, we haven't finalized our strategic plan, if we don't know what we're looking at, how do we choose an accurate number to borrow without having an accurate idea of where we're going in the future?
Well, again, I think it goes back to what Alicia was mentioning. We have to, hopefully with the schematic numbers or the design development numbers, we're going to have a fairly close number. And if we need to borrow additional money, then we probably at that point will have a better idea where we're going with the feasibility study, and we can wrap an additional amount into that borrowing so we can fund that toward the end of the project.
The 10 million is for IMS.
Right.
Just for
The other is down the road, and you wouldn't go out and actually borrow that or take out a bond until you know what those costs are.
And do remember to have some capital reserve money that's set aside. So if you did need an additional $1 million or something, you could pull from that capital reserve and then replenish it, over time. You needed to borrow from that.
So if I understand this correctly, initially we'll borrow and do the bond for the IMS, and then we'll add on the other at a later date.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, any other questions?
I just had one comment that may help the board. Once we move further and a master plan is determined, then part of what we still owe you for the feasibility study, our firm owes you, is the logistical analysis that I explained. Again, you may not even remember it, but it was basically taking the master plan, laying it out over 5 or 7 years, and seeing what your capital outlays per year would be projected to be. That will help you then look at what do we need in the coming years. I think this may be helpful to the board to ask Alicia. Alicia, with a borrowing, how long does the district have to use the money? And if they borrowed, say, $2 million more than they needed for the IMS project, and they had some money left over at the end of the bond issue that hadn't been used for capital projects, what would happen?
Very good questions. The general rule on tax code is you have to spend 85% of your borrowing in 3 years. So you could look at this in a larger scale if you were looking to lock in at lower interest rates. The unfortunate part of that is bonds also have redemption privileges, not like a bank loan. So that's why we're trying to keep the initial bond bank qualified. Those bonds are refinanceable in 5 years. A non-bank qualified bond, which is over 10 million, is somewhere around an 8 year. So it would be 8 years if you had not spent all the proceeds from the first bond issue.
Thank you for asking that question.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Comes up in
Very
every,
good question.
every project we do, every school district wants to know.
Any other questions of Alicia? Thank you, Doug, for arranging that presentation. That's helpful information for us.
You're welcome.
And thank you, Alicia.
My pleasure.
Okay, Mr. Spacuzza, the final item?
Yes, the final item under Facility and Services this evening is the item number 5, approval of contract with the Hayes Design Group.
Okay, I need a second.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, second? I wasn't sure
Seconded
as a
by
motion.
Mr. Christensen. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Spacuzza. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I was just going to outline what the 2 items were. Was the owner-architect agreement, the final draft, and the exhibits of the agreement.
Mrs. Douglas, can I jump in here for a moment
Yes,
and comment?
please.
So I wanted the board to be aware that there was considerable discussion with the district and the Hayes Group about the agreement. And one of the highlights that we think we've come to after much discussion is the idea of not agreeing to a percentage of a fee, but a lump sum amount for the fee. And that advantage, I think, comes with the recommendation of the administrative team, including Mr. McCausland, who's been a part of these discussions, that a lump sum fee would be a fixed amount that we would agree to pay the architect for this project, as opposed to a percentage. And we would agree to that lump sum before the bids went out. And so should the bids come in high, there is no windfall for the architect, or the bids come in low, then there's no savings for the district. And further, should there be any need for change orders in the future, there wouldn't be any agreeable percentage that the architect would get in the process. And moreover, then there really wouldn't be a question about the choice of materials, the cost of the materials being identified in the project that would perhaps drive the cost up as opposed to drive the quality up. And the board wouldn't then have to be suspicious that the architect was recommending something that would benefit them financially. The problem is, we want to get this agreement approved tonight so the architect can move on to the next phase of work. However, the district doesn't feel like we have enough detail and clarity on the actual costs to have a lump sum recommendation that would be appropriate for this project. So the agreement tonight has no amount or no percentage in it yet. And it does state that we would continue negotiations, and at the November timeframe, when the architects would be back with the design in a much more detailed phase and a much more close, accurate figure of the costs, would we then have a lump sum we would recommend to the board. So you're hearing me say that the approval tonight would be for all of the scope of the work that we would agree the architect to complete, but it doesn't specify the cost yet. And I'd ask the board's patience on that and time on that so we could give you what we believe is a better way to approach this with a lump sum rather than a percentage.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay?
Ms. Zundel, could you please speak to the 2 contracts because they're in much detail that goes beyond me.
They were long to read.
Yes, absolutely. I just wanted to also just explain payment to the architect prior to determining the lump sum is based upon the hourly fee schedule that's in the list of exhibits attached to the contract. And it's a lengthy document, but it is standard for projects of this type. It's an owner-architect agreement developed by the AIA. And as Dr. Walsh had said, there has been discussion about the terms by both the district administration and the architects you're working with. Hayes legal counsel has taken a look at the document. I've taken a look at the document and all of the exhibits a few times. Many discussions have been had. I'm happy to address any specific questions, but it outlines indemnification provisions, payments, timelines, expectations of the architect, expectations of the construction manager when you will approve a construction manager if the board does approve this to me moving forward. So that's just a summary.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Okay, Mr. McCausland, open up the voting, please.
Voting is open. Motion carries 7-1.
Thank you. Okay, at this time, we'll have any public comments that have come in. No public comments? Should I wait?
We have nothing on the board right now.
No, we don't need to wait.
No comments.
Okay, any board comments?
I just want to thank everyone for their presentations tonight. This was a lot of work and a lot of information. And again, it was a lot to digest over the last 2 days. But thank you very much. It does, I'm hoping the public understood these explanations tonight too also.
Yeah, you did a lot of work. It shows, and it's put together in a good proposal, so all of you, thank you.
I second that. Thank you very much for all of your hard work. Oh, we have a comment? Okay.
We're going to move to your comment. If you could state your name with our first person, if you'd state your name, your address, and we will have you talk here.
Sharon, it's you.
Yes.
Go ahead, Sharon.
Sharon Janisic, 4314 Anna Street. I just wanted to thank you so much for all of the work everybody put in to the presentations tonight. And particularly, I wanted to thank the board members who went out of their way to consider the needs of students with disabilities in the renovations of this project. It was deeply touching and meaningful, and I appreciate that you thought so much about what our students need in our district. And I wanted to make sure that I thanked you for that very sincerely. Thank you so much and have a good night.
Any board comments?
At this time,
more
there are no additional comments.
Okay.
Mrs. Douglas, this is Russ. I would just like to thank everyone for the presentation. I know this was pretty much a Facility and Services Committee meeting tonight, and I appreciate all the good presentations and the good questions that the board and everybody in the room has provided. Thank you.
Any other board comments?
That's the same thing to thank you to Dr. Walsh and Mr. Menchan, the Hayes Group, and PNC Bank. A lot of information, a lot of helpful information to help us move forward with some good decisions. But again, thank you, everybody.
Okay, I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Nagel,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Scalzo. Mr. McCausland, put up the vote.
It's coming. Voting is open. Motion carries.
Okay, this meeting is adjourned.